Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar discussing how to assess an organization's readiness for change. I am Madison Lundquist, the Principal Research Lead for the Process and Performance Management area here at APQC, and I'm also joined today by Lynda Braksiek, the Knowledge Management Principal Research Lead here at APQC. Now, change management is both a topic and a critical skill that continually comes up in conversations and research with both our knowledge management and process management professionals. So I'm super excited to hear more about that from our speaker today. Before we jump in, a couple of reminders. Don't forget to use the Q&A feature to submit any questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. And we will be recording this presentation, so you'll get a copy of the slides and the recording within a few days. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Melissa Leland. She brings 20 years of experience in solving people problems and leading organizations through successful transitions in various sectors and global landscapes. Her expertise is organizational effectiveness, focusing on leadership effectiveness, strategy, culture, organizational development, and change management. She believes in doing change with people, not to people. Melissa, welcome. We're super excited to have you today.
Great. Thank you so much. So great to be here.
Of course.
And we'll go ahead and jump in. So today we're going to be talking about assessing readiness. This is a topic, at least in my experience, we don't hear as much about. We talk about how to manage change once a project is going, once an effort is moving forward. But how do we stop first and understand, are we truly ready? And it really resonates and aligns well, APQC, because of the quality component to it and managing risk before your project even gets started. So I wanted to focus on that today and hoping that you can expand your knowledge of overall change management, adding risk to that competency. So what we'll learn together today. So first, understanding the importance of assessing risk. Why is it worth the time and effort, and what kind of return you can get from that? And identifying potential barriers that could play a part and are very common in giving some leading indicators that there could be some risk, there could be some challenges that we need to mediate before the change effort begins to help have the overall success of the project from the start and set that up well. And then and then techniques to actually do the assessment. How do you assess readiness? How do you understand the risks that are present and how to analyze the presence and the impact of those? Over to the right, I'm sharing the ACMP standard for change management. And this is the professional designation for change management. And so wanted to share that. So if we look at the model, that top one, evaluating change impact and organizational readiness, that's the first step of this validated model. And so that's where we're gaining a lot of the context and direction from today. And as mentioned, there is opportunity to add any questions or comments in the chat. We'll also be doing some polling. So make sure that you're close to your laptop or your computer device so you can participate in those and we can understand the themes from this audience and what you're each experiencing. So first starting, so not that any of you have done this, but maybe who's had a friend that has done any of these mentioned in the poll? It should be visible to you now. You should be able to answer as many applicable as possible, or as relevant, I'm sorry. Great, are we getting many responses in? Okay, so we have some ties for the first two. Um, and then leading, though, was the last one when you engage, when you went to engage a resource or group and then they weren't available at that time, followed closely by trying to convince a decision maker and continue to move forward with the presence of resistance, which is very common. And those are very common behaviors. We recognize the value of whatever effort we're doing. We want it to be successful. We move forward. We see the value of it and the purpose, and maybe others will catch on as we go forward. And so, yes, those are very common. So thank you for sharing. So now we're going to talk about what are really the drivers of assessing risk and what really matters. What do we need to really be conscious of as kind of red flags and other representations of, whoa, we might need to stop and reassess this before we move forward. So drivers of readiness. So what are the indicators of what really reflects readiness or not? And the key things, first starting with culture and values. So this also entails strategy, and is there congruency between what this effort is and what are those things that already exist within the organization, such as culture, values, strategic direction, mission, those kinds of things, or are they counterintuitive? And so first thinking about that, just at face value, is there a disconnect there? Then commitment and attitude, what extent there is organizational support and dedication for this, and to support communication as well. And so are there dedicated change agents or sponsors that are committed to this work and making it successful, giving it the time and attention? And then capacity and resources is the last key driver. And capacity, we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but it's time, but it's also skill representation, it's facilities and other resources, technology, equipment. And so we'll dive into this a little bit more, but those are the main themes in terms of assessing readiness. And then we'll get into more specifics in the following slides. And I think I think I saw a message that there was a hand raised.
Yes, there was, but they can use the Q&A and chat to submit any questions. So if any pop up, we'll see those in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So now that we understand the key drivers from a macro level, we'll move forward into continuing to get it down to now, what do we do with this? So first thinking about now, how does this align to the nature of the work that you may be doing, which might be quality management, it may be process improvement or process design, and how is there alignment here, so we can think about maybe frame of reference with change management. So one, success is based on understanding the end goals, the objectives of this is what we're trying to fix or expedite or resolve or introduce. It also takes collaboration. So if you are going and redesigning a process, for example, you're meeting with individuals to understand how the work is done, where are their handoffs, how does it actually happen, who's impacted, so you can create a relevant approach and solution. It requires taking a methodical approach too, of we don't just put this all together, we don't do as we go. It's having a regimen to it and understanding that from the start of this is how we're going to approach this in a methodical and pragmatic way. It's also a quality control mechanism, and to help with efficiency, to help with overall results, accuracy, feasibility, usability, and in the end, your stakeholder or customer satisfaction, that they can take this new solution that you've provided or this new change and it's living. They can apply it immediately. It's not something that sits on the shelf. And that effective communication and education allow it to really come to life. So when a new program is designed, when a new process is re-engineered or resolved, it's not that we just have it done and it stays in some file and have expectations that it is being used. No, we need to communicate it to the right people in a way that is meaningful to them based on how they're impacted, and teach them how to use it. They're going to need potentially some new skills and behaviors in order to follow that new process or utilize the new program that has been developed. So that's where there's some synergies between the two competencies, or between various competencies. And so what are the readiness inputs? So we talked about at a high level, those key drivers, but what are, from a more ground level, tangible, applicable standpoint, what are those inputs? And so we can drive down a little bit further. First is the strength of the case for change. And we'll talk about each of these in depth just to introduce those. Then sponsor engagement, degree of reliance on skills and behaviors, and then prior experience with change. We'll spend some time talking about that. Impact of financial health. So we're doing this effort. How is it impacting the financial health and vitality of the organization, both within the project timeframe and then with after implementation? Impact to stakeholders, vendors, and customers. So we will talk about that external perspective as well. Organizational alignment that considers the values, the culture piece that I mentioned, and then capacity. So we'll dive into each of these a little bit further now. So case for change, or business case, may have heard different terminology here, but it's really, why are we doing this? What is the value that this is producing? At least in my experience, it is, we have this new effort, we have to do this, this is now a priority. And that's how it can sometimes be described. And all those things might be true. And it also doesn't tell a complete story about, why are we doing this? Why are we doing it now? What is maybe the opportunity cost if we don't do this now? How does it shift priorities? Those things. And because this is really the linchpin for buy-in. And when there is some indicators, if there's lack of support, for example, or buy-in, or a lot of negative water cooler talk, often the need is to go back to the case for change or the business case and make that stronger. So what does this look like? What should it answer? Your business case or your case for change should answer, why should we do this? Why is this, and what is the best solution? And why is this the best solution? And what will happen if we proceed with this investment decision? What outcomes can we expect? How will this set us up better? How will this mitigate risk? How will this help us serve our customers better? Whatever that outcome might be. So there are different inputs to consider when you're thinking about the case for change. It's not just, we're doing this now because we have to. Over on the right, you can see a model that shows some of the different inputs. This looks very lengthy. It's real, your case for change or business case. It isn't a lengthy paragraph or anything. It's a couple of sentences, but these are the considerations of what it should speak to and what should be included in that case for change. So there's something more to reference, to guide when you are developing your business case or case for change, and making sure that these things are included, and then something to go back to as a reference as well. So if you're dealing with resistance, if you're dealing with a lack of buy-in, and sometimes that's based on a lack of understanding, going back to this and saying, what maybe have we missed in our case for change, or what might need to be strengthened, can be a really helpful aid when managing particularly the buy-in piece. And so that case for change, that business case, that should be a key component of ongoing communications to educate, to re-educate, and remind your stakeholders why this matters. Why is this a priority now amongst the 20 other things on their list to do? And it needs to be restated. We know that not everyone reads the emails that we send, and we think, gosh, we've communicated this so much. But it continues to be at the forefront of our communications and in our different communication methods as well, because while we may have communicated this 5 times to specific individuals or levels, maybe it's those that work in a production environment, for example, they have not received it. And they're hearing it for the first time. So it's important to make this really clear, really strong, and even testing it with someone removed from the project and get their thoughts on it. Does it answer those things? What do you take from this when you hear this case for change? Have a neutral party that isn't involved, and they can help give some feedback on how to strengthen that or validation that it is strong. So there will be another poll in front of you, and I have some examples of 2 cases for change, and I want your thoughts on which one do you feel is more compelling? Okay, great. We have strong response on that first one, and very thorough. Using that construct over to the right answers a lot of that value proposition of we're not just doing this because, but we are doing it because this is the best solution. We're not just replacing and swapping out, but this has been vetted, and we found that this is going to be the best solution. Why it is urgent. It talked about the ERP being sunset next year. For any of you who have survived an ERP implementation, you understand the lengthiness of that process. And so that's the urgency, is why we need to act now. If we don't have that ERP, we may as well close the doors, right? And so, yeah, answering all those things. So I encourage you to use that model on the right, again, as a reference document or a reference or a job aid when you are building that case for change. And if you're in a change management role, this is often done by the project manager. Some of you might wear 2 hats, or you may be coming in and you may help your project manager with articulating a business case or a case for change based on your role. Now we'll move on to the next input, which is sponsor engagement. Again, if you are in a change management, sole change management role, your project manager may have already identified a sponsor. This may have been coming from the sponsor, but if you are in this role of identifying one, then it will be helpful for you to understand, what do we need to be aware of? And if you are not selecting the sponsor, but you are engaged in the project throughout, these are some considerations also to keep in mind of where might we need to make adjustments with a sponsor, whether it is their overall effectiveness or who makes most sense to be the sponsor as conditions change, as the change effectiveness might be showing some kind of symptoms. So thinking first, are they interested in this project? That is going to show. And as stakeholders of any effort, the person they most want to hear from It's not the PM, it's not the change management individual, it is the sponsor. That is who they see as the credible source of information because they are also typically in the business and impacted by this. Is their department, speaking to that, is their department or them personally, are they impacted by the project? They have to have some teeth in it where they are able to say, yes, I get this is another thing, or yes, this is a priority, and this is because this is the reason why. They need to be close to it and to the impact to have that credibility as well, where they can speak to it. They can speak the language, they can speak the nomenclature, they understand the impacts, the correlations, and maybe some links of what else is impacted, who else is impacted, and they will be a key role in this, not just as a messenger, but to help guide the project as well. And then next, do they have capacity to serve? Or maybe they're a sponsor on 3 other projects, and this might not be one that they have time to serve on. So really assessing that and thinking, does this make sense? Are we going to get their engagement, their attention and focus and support as much as we need in order to carry this forward successfully and to get the buy-in from stakeholders that we need in order for this to be successful? Also thinking about, do they have the necessary skills? It may be presenting, it may be influence, it may be navigating politics. Do they have the necessary skills to successfully sponsor this effort? And those skills for this effort might be different from the skills needed for another effort. Influence and presenting and navigation are typically pretty core for sponsors, and but there might be other ones that are more specific to a unique effort. And then, are they seen as influential to impacted stakeholders? Are they trusted, for example? Are they seen as credible? Are they reliable? So their level of influence, for example, are they able to escalate and resolve issues that come up? Are they known for that? So kind of thinking about their reputation and level of influence and credibility and how they're going to be perceived, because that is also a tipping point for stakeholder buy-in of what is being told and to them and by whom is going to impact buy-in. So assessing that sponsor that you have engaged as it relates to readiness, do they check all these boxes? The next item we'll talk about, it's related, but now to the behavior and skills of the end users or different stakeholders that may be impacted, whether it's because of their skills or behaviors needed during the project or as a result of implementation. So we can't just flip a switch and automatically people are capable of using this new system, using this new process, showing up in a new way. So considering what behaviors and identifying first, we need to first identify what is the need. So what behaviors or skills will be needed in order for this change and the result of the change to be successful? Do they need to learn a new technology? Do they need to enhance their customer service skills? Do they need to be more collaborative, where maybe they are used to working more autonomously and independent, and other behaviors? So patience with vendors as they might be using a new technology as well. That might be a new behavior that is needed where they haven't experienced teaching vendors before how to use the system they're impacted by, which need to be developed. So this gets into understanding what is present in terms of the behaviors and skills needed, and then where's their gap? So what does not exist today that is going to be necessary to be developed? Because we don't just put fairy dust on a change and automatically people have these capabilities. And then taking that a next step further and thinking about who needs these new behaviors or who needs these behaviors and skills. Not everyone is going to be impacted in the same way. So it might be your customer service department that will need this, or it might be your account managers or others based on the nature of the transformation that you are leading. So what is the audience, who's the audience that needs that shift or needs those behaviors and skills present? And how realistic is it? Is this really night and day, and it is going to be a heavy lift because they haven't done anything like this before? It's maybe very technical, very antiquated, or very different behaviors that they are just not used to. You didn't hire them to do this, but they are still going to be in their role when this effort happens. So they're going to need to be equipped, assuming you're not replacing all the individuals and the incumbents that currently exist. So how realistic is it? That's going to guide, gosh, practically, can this happen? And also, when do we need to start working on that skill and behavior development? How much effort is it going to take to get there so they are to the adequate skill and behavioral demonstration level by the time go live happens? So we have another poll. What kind of obstacles, whether behavioral change or skill development, or maybe about the same, what have you seen more? What have you experienced presence of more with obstacles and challenges? Was it shifting behaviors? Was it developing skills for a gap that exists, or is it about the same? Okay, so our results, thank you. 63% on behavioral change, 5% on skill development, and 32 were about equally distributed. Yeah, and that's great to see that feedback, because behavioral change can take so much effort, and I think it's also something that's not always considered. And that's why it is a key component of assessing risk, because you might be, again, expecting drastic or significant behavioral change, which can really be an obstacle that might be overlooked if readiness is not assessed. Thank you. The next one is stakeholder impact analysis. I won't spend as much time on here because I think, and if you've gone to any change management education, stakeholder impact is talked about a lot. But first, making sure that we really understand the unique audiences, not treating everyone the same, and the type of impact, and also the timing of impact. When are they going to need to be engaged? Because not everyone is engaged at the same time, because it might be you are asking them to serve a role in the project, or they are impacted as the result of the project. And so making sure that we understand that. I'm working with a client currently, and they didn't spend time on readiness, so they hadn't segmented their audiences to understand the impact by level, and they were ready to go, and we had to pause for a little bit as we found some issues along the way as we identified their stakeholders and their needs. So it's very important, because you'll want to understand those, but also as a way to meaningfully engage with those stakeholders. And then the impact of financial health. So thinking about the investment that you are making with this effort, whether it's a new solution or program or offering, whatever that might look like. The impact to resource supply, it might be facilities, it might be equipment if you are testing a new product, for example, along with obviously people who are engaged in the effort along the way, or is this going to require additional headcount as a result of this project? And then the stated ROI, making sure that that is very clear and known and articulated so there are no surprises. I just worked with a client, and as they were already into an implementation that had not been stated, and it ended up really reflecting poorly on the leader, and they're no longer there because that was not measured and it was not articulated to their board. And so it's really important to be transparent there and making sure that that is an accurate representation as well. Because, you know, even with this investment, you're taking resource supply away from something else that might be able to be done. How is it worth it? And it also might impact your timeline of when do those investments need, or that supply need to be freed up. And so think about why and how are these relevant to readiness? And so the way that they're related is, do we have an accurate and a thorough understanding of their impact? So we can, for example, if we're working with a third party on an implementation, we make sure that we're holding that third party to a timeline because it is going to have financial impact throughout. We're holding up resources. We might be hiring contractors or otherwise. And so those all have great financial impact. The next one I want to spend some time on is the organization's prior experience with change. And this is really about like what change baggage do we bring with us or that others bring with us? And that's going to look different for everyone. And so it might be a change that recently occurred within your organization, or it might be something that they experienced at a prior organization. I worked with one client, we were doing a compensation study for them, and they had recently gone through an ERP implementation. They were told it was going to solve all their problems. It did not. Change was not managed. They didn't have change management representation as part of that project. They tried to do it themselves, and it went really poorly. So when we came externally and said, we're going to be doing this, this is how it's going to benefit you, there was a lot of skepticism and yeah, right, going on. Also, in another organization that I did a project for, a job architecture where you're evaluating roles and how do they level in the organization, we're asking for clear understanding of the jobs. And for some, the last time an organization was going through job descriptions and so on and so forth, it ended in a riff. And so that was what they were bringing with us when we were saying, this is how it's going to help career mobility and compensation equity and accuracy. They were bringing their prior experience of, I've heard this before, and this is how it personally impacted me. So we really need to think about the prior experience. Have they managed change well? And then what kind of changes have they had? And those impacted have they had? And this is where emotional intelligence and empathy really come into play. So instead of being dismissive and saying, well, it's not what it is now, and they just need to accept that, we really need to think about, how does this impact potentially the readiness, and what kind of communication and other activities we might need to do. For example, in that organization that experienced that not so great change very recently, there was then more need to have conversations with individuals, with groups, focus groups, of really understanding what didn't go well, what are your feelings about the last change, and what could have been done better, what really caused problems for you, so we can make sure that we avoid this going forward. And so that level of effort might be different if that experience hadn't occurred prior. So I'd love to hear in the chat, what is a time when a prior experience impacted readiness for an effort that you can think of? It could be positive or negative. And as some Pat commentary comes in, if those can be read out loud, please.
We will definitely watch for those to come in and read them out loud. And I know Lynda has a lot of experience with change management as well, so I didn't know if she wanted to chime in. Some people from the chat are saying major org realignment that was kept in the dark until 4 weeks before the change. An ERP implementation, change management was questionable when previous experience of change has not gone well, like you said. Let's see what else here.
I think everybody has one of those experiences, Melissa, that, oh my gosh, the last time we did a major upgrade on ERP or this system or that system, or we reorgs, somebody mentioned reorgs. I think that's one of the biggest ones. Oh my gosh, last time we did a reorg, I didn't know who my boss was going to be. I didn't have, you know, it's like this, it's this fear of the unknown, right? It's that fear of the unknown. So I think that does impact readiness if you don't get in front of that and give them enough information so they can at least feel comfortable that they're prepared for that change. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
I want to share.
Yeah, and when go ahead.
There's quite a few coming in. We had a very poor implementation of time tracking solution that is still used years later as the business case for change management. Company's attitude was just find something to like about it. A lot of people have the we've tried it before mindset, so it's really hard to enact change. Not getting a what's in it for me perspective. Fear of the unknown, like you said.
I like somebody did you see the example, Maddy, in there about is kind of a good example where they were talking about their HOA board, right? Their, is that a homeowners association board, and that they made a change. They didn't make a change, but they still explained to them when they were making decisions along the way, like just to keep people in the know, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great trust building technique. If there's something to report, they will report it. Yeah, so this is really important to consider, just all the comments that came in from your own experiences and keeping that in mind when you're leading change of, oh gosh, my audience is coming with all this that I'm not aware of. Maybe I wasn't involved in it. But it's also true and alive for them when they hear about the next thing's gonna, solve problems, be the next great thing, and understanding and stopping to understand what are people's prior experiences. So then we know what do we need to do to understand that, to build trust, to think of techniques used so we don't do that to them again. They don't have a negative experience. What communication do they need to receive, the frequency, those kinds of things that can be very much like, great, we can do that. We wouldn't have known that that was an ask unless we did ask and assessed readiness. So great comments. Thank you so much. And I just kind of going back to that one, something I've seen that has been really hard is that stance of, well, we need to do this, so they just need to suck it up. Or they just need to find something positive. If they don't want to deal with it, they can go. Those kinds of things, where these things were very, very relevant and real for what people experience. So that empathy and understanding is, and it will go a long way too. It can curtail your communications. It should curtail your communications and your approaches of, we understand this has been said before and we own that. This is what we're doing differently based off of what we heard from you. And we did that with that one organization I talked about with the bad ERP. We heard you, and this is how we're approaching this differently. So you don't have the same experience. And alignment. So we talked about this a little bit. and making sure that these things are all congruent. So does this match who's going to be doing the work with or impacted from a structure standpoint, and who's engaged, the culture, is there alignment there? For example, if we're saying, say you're in healthcare, we're saying positive patient experience, and now we're saying, well, we need to just do this all through email, and you need to take no more than 1 minute with each person that calls in, for example. That would be a counterintuitive and an example where there's lack of alignment, and that would need to be discussed and explained of why are we asking this if this is maybe our mission, what we have stated. And I wanted to bring in the performance management piece because it's also often not talked about. So if we're doing a change and there's a new behavioral or skill expectation, we're planning on doing the education for that, and someone's still not doing it because they're resistant to it, they don't like it, they are being naysayer, whatever it might be, just being a roadblock. What does performance management look like? And what I often run into is we don't have a great performance management approach, or we don't really hold people accountable, those kinds of things, and where that's not baked into it. And we also don't position leaders to have expectation conversations with employees around what does this look like going forward and what is your role. And so keeping that in mind is really important as well. And have we taught our leaders how to coach, for example? That's often something that can be a roadblock and really create some problems throughout the project for you. The next one I want to talk about is the capacity for change. So this is all pretty straightforward and known, but thinking about, first, it's typically, oh gosh, we have to do this. Our ERP is being sunset. And then we get into the how, but the readiness helps assess, can we reasonably do this? And it also informs the approach that we'll take, how we engage with our stakeholders to make this successful, so we don't just launch into it head first. And some resources. So think about, what resource do you find has the most constraints? And that can be really challenging. And I'm sorry, I can't remember if we have a poll for this or if it's through the chat. Poll. Okay, great. Thank you. So which one do you feel has the most capacity restraints? And as you're filling this out, I brought this up because sometimes it's thinking about, scheduling equipment or technology needed. When is that going to be needed for testing, for example, or for training a facility? When is that maybe going to be, you're going to have to pull production employees off the floor in order to be able to do the training. And so thinking about those different examples of capacity restraints. So people, not surprising, but also, the attention and the focus. We have competing priorities. With capacity management, it's also very important that whenever a change is introduced, there's also an alignment of your priorities. So the sponsor would say, for example, because we are doing this now, this is how it shifts your priorities and how it will shift your focus. So we need you to focus more on this now, and we'll put this on the back burner, or dedicate less time to this. So there can be transparency for those impacted and less ambiguity. And then how can these be accomplished? How all these inputs, how can they happen reasonably? Identifying resources to gather that reliable input. So for example, change history. Who do you talk to that would actually be able to know that? It's going to be many. Talking to the right level of what is this going to require? How are you impacted? what do you need? Getting support with analysis, specifically the financial piece, make friends with your finance team, and solicit external perspective as well. So how are our suppliers going to be impacted? How are our customers going to be impacted? Because they have a role in this as well, and setting them up well, and managing change also well with them. And in summary, these are, again, the inputs that we talked about of what do we assess to understand and gauge readiness. And so thinking about what stood out most to you, and what step will you focus most on going forward now that we've talked about these things. So we'd love to hear comments in the chat. And Lynda, if you have anything to share as well as it relates to what your team does and your role.
We'll give the chat just a second. It takes just a second, right, for everybody to get their thoughts and kind of start typing. But I was just thinking about readiness is just such a critical component. And sometimes we find out and we're asked to help with the change after the horse has already left the barn and there's no time for readiness. That at least that's what it feels like. But I think one of my learnings is that no matter when you get engaged in the change, you can still back yourself up and do some of those readiness components and assessments to make sure you understand the culture that you're walking into right now, right? I mean, no matter where it is in the change, I don't know about your experience, Melissa, but I feel like just because you get involved late, you shouldn't skip those readiness steps, because you do really need to know what have they done before and how are people going to react to this, and what do I need to know to be prepared to manage at least what's left of the change effectively.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you for raising that. Yeah, with the client that I'm working with now, that they didn't assess readiness, and we came to launching, and they were asked to we're analyzing jobs and writing some job descriptions, and we found their leaders don't know how to. They haven't had experience with this. They haven't been tasked with identifying skill needs, for example. So now we're having to back up, spend some time there, because it wasn't known that this skill wasn't to the necessary level of presence and to the necessary level. Yeah, absolutely. But we're doing it now. To your point, we can jump in and make it happen. I see some comments coming in around capacity, and also around skill and behaviors. And yeah, we can always go back to this, and again, understanding those from the forefront, or even in the midst of the project. If you uncover it, it will help mitigate further risk, but also cost the earlier you do catch it. So just because, to your point, Lynda, it's not happening at the forefront, if there is a need for pause, you haven't spent money on those other resources that are set up and wasted time there, when we can take a step back. So great.
There was a couple of sponsorship too, Melissa. I think people saw sponsorship as something that it's an area of focus. You've got to have those sponsors. You've got to get that level support, top level support.
Absolutely. And I think that is one where people get put in the position because they need the project, or it's their department, but we don't always understand or assess, is that the right sponsor? Again, the sponsor can also play a key role in being transparent around what is the sequence of priorities now that this exists. I think that's something that a sponsor can play a great role in, because often there can be a reaction of, oh gosh, when do we do this when we're doing the 5 other things, or whatever else, and saying, this is where we're at now, and being clear about that. Great. Thank you so much for the comments that were included. And so now we have some time for any questions. I'm sure there are some that are already in the chat, some that might come through now. So Madison, if you'd like to raise those, and Lynda's going to help with answering some of these as well.
Yes, we have a few questions that have come in. There's two that are more related to sponsorship, but there's one I want to do first, and they wanted you to expand a little bit more about what the attention resource means on the slide for capacity for change.
Yeah, so that is really about our ability to focus, like how, the kind of the whack-a-mole example. If we have many different things that we are able to put 10% attention to and focus and really concentrate on, are we going to be able to go to, according to timeline, is that person really available? Do they really have capacity to do this? If it's fragmented focused, there's a quality cost or a risk to that as well. If we are too dispersed, to come back to things. So thinking about, can we focus on this, or is more of their time already absorbed here and it's not practical?
Great. So looking at some of the sponsorship questions, what can change managers do if sponsor engagement assessment shows that the sponsor isn't a suitable person, but they have little influence over changing said sponsor?
Yeah, that's a great one. This would obviously be something, if you're in that change management role, coordinating with your project manager would be, before going into any conversation, would be really helpful to get their take on that and to get aligned. And how it, obviously depends on the personality, but the change manager can also serve as a coach often for sponsors of, this is what we need, this is how we want this to come across, or this is our objective for this exercise or activity or for this communication. Where are you feeling comfortable? What isn't as clear? And also the skill. So you can do, formal skill assessment. There's things out there that might be a little awkward if you're talking to someone, again, much higher than you, but way of coaching of, this might be beneficial. This is a very valuable skill to sponsors in general. So let's talk about how we're going to make that happen and how we can set you up well in a coaching, can help it be less, I guess, less offensive if they take offense, but just really like, we want to support you as a sponsor and set you up for success. So let's talk about how this is going to go. What are your thoughts on how you're going to present this and go through that exercise?
This one is kind of along similar topic, but talks about managing up, if you will. So they have a situation where an executive sponsor is being driven by highest levels of executive leadership to implement an unrealistic timeline. So their sponsor is encouraging the change team to cut corners and not do a full change management plan as they see should be done. So how would you, or what would you recommend to that person to maybe convince the sponsor of ways to talk back to their executive leadership, reason with them, things like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would really use the readiness assessment as your data point. And so then it's not as personal. It's not, oh, we can't do this or whatever else, but using that readiness assessment so you can provide something, again, that's super pragmatic in front of them. People like data, of saying, this is, whatever category and input you're talking about, such as capacity, and this is the risk, and this is the cost of if we drag this out further, or if we, if they have, again, only 10% capacity to this is going to be the cost to that, along with, we're not going to be able to fulfill what we've already promised to ... whomever, and really put that in front of them. So with this risk and the potential costs or implications to this, how would you like to proceed? And or put a recommendation in front of them and let that data be the messenger.
Great point. Talking a little bit about resistance to change, what is a good response or some tool or tactic to use when people say we've tried that before and they're not seeing the reason for the change?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's where helping people feel heard and having a conversation is worth all the time in the world. So whether it's a focus group or the time with the individual, I experienced that when I was doing an implementation, and I actually engaged just as many naysayers as change agents as supporters, because they were the most influential and they were the strongest voices. And so when I spent time having conversations about what didn't work, how is this different, how is this the same, what do we need to be aware of, and that's great, we're going to institute that based on what we heard. And so this is already set up better for success because of the input you provided. In my experience that I had, they ended up being the greatest supporters, where then they went and told their people, oh, this is how it's different. And they became my marketers. And that is one way that you can approach it. You know, certainly many others, but I think feeling heard is the greatest way to overcome resistance.
Great. There's two more questions. I know we're about at time. So this next one is about, do you have any recommended tools for tracking sponsor sentiment throughout change management activities?
Yeah, there are some templates that you can find online, like a risk log, for example, like if they are bringing up risks that you can bring up, that you can capture and how they're being mediated. And then also with a sponsor, I'm not quite sure if you mean by concerns about the sponsor or efforts the sponsor is making, if there can be a little bit of clarification there.
The first one.
If there's concerns with the sponsor. Yeah, and that, I mean, it can be very subjective to the organization and how easy their boss is to talk to, how easy they are to talk to. I think coaching, though, I would go back to that, the coaching approach and asking them, like, how are you feeling about in a sponsor role, and have a one-on-one conversation with them, because they might be feeling just as inept and just as challenged, and see what kind of support they need. I've done that before, where then we found individual skill development for that sponsor that we kept very private, and that is something that helped. So yeah, having the one-on-one conversation and asking them.
Great. There's one final question that we can wrap up here is, do you suggest to check the people readiness at every level of the organization?
Every stakeholder.
Such as the head of department, supervisors, all the way down to the workers performing the work that will change.
Yeah, whoever has a role in the project or is going to be impacted, and going to the appropriate level to is really important to understand their capacity and readiness. Supervisors, for example, are going to have more eyes on the ground of what's really going on and what are the implications and impacts, versus, you know, maybe a higher level, they're going to have a more strategic role and understand vision more. And so going to the appropriate level based on what you're trying to understand. So for example, the higher level, it might be understanding, now how do our priorities change? That might be the question for them. Where the supervisor might be, how do we schedule this to still maintain business continuity?
I know we're right at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, Melissa, so much for the presentation today. We heard a lot of great feedback in the chat, and I'm excited to get the webinar slides and recording out to our participants following this session. Just a few reminders, watch for that email within a couple days. Don't forget to let us know what you thought about the webinar via the satisfaction survey. Of course, visit our events page to learn more about our upcoming webinars, our events, annual conference, and any of our past webinars you've missed. be sure to check out our on-demand page and you can see them there. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. Again, thank you so much, Melissa, for presenting and talking a little bit more about readiness for change. And we were happy to bring our process and knowledge management folks together today for a topic that definitely crosses both of our areas. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.